Yo, yo, yo. This is Dylan Oros, your friendly neighborhood writer, and trying something new here at the beginning of March as I come off of the end of an era for me as a writer and on this indie author journey. This will be Author Diary number 1. It is March 2nd, 2026, and I have a rundown of topics to speak through PTI style, that is, pardon the interruption, the old ESPN show. And I just want to reflect on where I've come over the last few years as a writer and look forward to what happens next and what the new projects are and the next books by myself will be. And yesterday, or rather over the weekend, Saturday, the end of February, I completed revisions, polishing, and totally completing my sci-fi cyberpunk book, cyber serial Postmodern Prometheus. I hit the button, it's still in process, I still have to get my author copy, so it'll be fully released here in March. But my previous books, Journeyers, I published last summer in August, and Wherever He May Swarm, Journeyers Epic Fantasy, Wherever He May Swarm is sci-fi, horror, thriller, satire. I released that in fall at the end of November. And then I have been working on revisions and finishing touches for a manuscript that was in pretty good shape already, which I'll get into, for Cyber Serial in the first 2 months of 2026. So these 3 books I'm associating as one and published them all in a rather short period of time over like the last 7 months. And it's because I worked on them as a trio. They were my coming out party. They were a crystallization of my evolution as a writer and my first completed novels. Not my first attempted novels, but my first completed novels, complete ideas, really good concepts, outlines that invigorated me, and then drafting processes that this continuous process of discovery and just imagination, letting the imagination run wild. And this goes back to 2023 when I decided, with the help of a friend, us kind of collaborating on this idea. Initial idea for Journeyers was an animated series, or trying to come up with a web comic that we could maybe adapt to animation later. And I'm someone who has a background of short fiction and writing and blogging online about art, video games, books, movies, in addition to writing my short fiction, which was primarily inspired by Twilight Zone, which I started writing around 2017 as a challenge to myself to see if I could write a Twilight Zone season of episodes. As in, I started brainstorming lots of different ideas and taking notes and starting this whole organization of how I outline and how I come up with ideas. So I'd been writing short fiction for a long time. I'd been getting better. I'd been working at my craft. I had shifted my career from finance into the copywriting realm. And in 2023, I spent that year writing Journeyers. And Journeyers was the novel, epic fantasy novel, which became 2 novels, a part 1 and a part 2. After I captured the sprite of inspiration and had this core concept that I was very excited about. So Journeyers was the first book that I published, indie published last summer, but in 2024 was when I queried Journeyers. And I also queried at the end of 24 and into 2025, I queried Wherever He May Swarm and Cyber Serial. So as I got pretty serious and pretty excited about Journeyers, the idea, the writing, and then these other 2 novel ideas came to me as once that engine started and once it started having that momentum, I fully leaned into it, fully started to express all these ideas onto paper, forming these outlines. I mean, one of the biggest breakthroughs as just an aside here, for me as like a writer and going from short fiction, which I had a pretty clean grasp on and had good understanding of how to write short fiction, how to create characters for short fiction, how to create pretty satisfying little short loops of science fiction, fantasy, and horror type stories, which is what I write. The novel and the long form story was always pretty intimidating to me as a mountain to climb, as a dragon facing me, in the sense that I had a lot of trouble fully investing and fully letting myself get into, okay, this is a whole story. So that means the character arcs have to be this grand thing. We have to write a lot of dialogue from the same character over and over again. We have to create scenes and descriptions and bridge the world building together through not so much information dumps and exposition, which is kind of the cliche or the first instinct for a novel writer, amateur novel writer, so to speak. And I say amateur endearingly. I definitely consider myself an amateur in the sense that I'm doing this for the passion, and I write no matter how many readers I have, or no matter how many good or bad or indifferent reactions I have to my writing. It's something that's like an innate creative impulse in me now, that I'm very much, I let my imagination lead my life, and I let my imagination fully delve me into these stories and these fantasies that I'm creating on the page. So something that was very difficult for me was the concept of the length and the investment you had to have to actually do a novel. So one of my fears was I'll start writing a novel and then I'll realize this is a bad idea, or like this story sucks, or I don't know where it's going. I get confused. So a huge breakthrough for me was outlining. Outlining was something that unlocked really detailed outlining and creating character cards. I use Trello. It's an organizing kind of workflow program. It's very much like a Notion, which I think has become the main popular this type of tool. But I've been using Trello for years, and it is a godsend for basically outsourcing my brain, or these ideas that come up, into receptacles that then I can go and see the architecture and the landscape of the stories, so to speak. So once I started realizing how important outlining was, and I started creating these characters and momentum begetted momentum, and I started to understand how the world worked and how the story worked, and I got to a point where I would fully outline, probably not as detailed as some people outline, but pretty detailed outline. Every chapter has its core concepts. Some chapters have way more detail than others. Some of them are just like, this is going to happen, and then you got to figure out when you get there. A lot of that's like the middle chapters, some of the later chapters, and then the ending. Another thing that was a huge breakthrough is knowing the ending, knowing the exact ending point and the emotional resonance of that moment was really important for me to like fully go forward. And yeah, and then once I started writing, of course, the whole writing process, you have all these new adventures and these new emotions, because the outlining is like one high, or like one, you think you have a full grasp on the story and you get excited to write it, and the outlining helps do that. But the outlining also is about creating boundaries and like bounding in the story to where it's not just like this endless thing that is overwhelming and confusing. For whenever you start writing, that's going to be a problem. At least it is for me. So the outline bounded it into something that was manageable and understandable. And that was something that, just to help me to go. So then once I started writing, the outline was there and all that. So I'm sure every outliner, I'm preaching to the choir, and then pantsers are like, that's all that work. Or I lose the joy of the writing process if I know it's going to happen. But the thing that I find, and I'm a hybrid in this way, because truth be told, most of my short story outlines were pretty sparse, if nothing at all, just maybe like a concept, like a one sentence concept. And a lot of my short story fiction writing is, I am pantsing it. I'm flying by the seat of my pants, so to speak. And it was a pure discovery writing is another way of saying pantsing. And I find in novels, yes, I'm outlining, I'm doing this whole process, figuring out who the characters, what the world is, what the chapters are going to be, what the plot is, before through the outline. But once you start writing, I find that I'm a hybrid, and that in those bounds that I've created, I'm able to do all this really cool improvisation. And when impossible, it's like, no, this isn't what needs to happen. I'm going to go outside the bounds and do this new thing. And then that's just completely natural because you built to that, so to speak. So this is all to say that I've had this process of, once I got really excited about Journeyers, once I started outlining and even writing and drafting in a pretty good shape, Wherever He May Swarm and Cyber Serial, over the course of 2024 and 2025, I started querying to agents. And as I got excited, I did all this research on how to do that process. Okay, what is a query letter? What do you have to pitch? How does it work? Oh, you don't go to a publisher, you go to an agent. The agent connects you with publishers. The agent is the real gatekeeper, so to speak. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that literally, like the agent allows you access into the world of traditional publishing, which every author, every person who's trying to write a novel out there, the first question is, okay, how do I publish this? How do I get in bookshelves? And, you do that whole process and you learn about the publishing world. The publishing world is very harsh presently. It's probably been that way for years. And the market's contracting, less people are reading, there's trends, there's only so many, it's musical chairs and there's not many chairs. There's not a lot of slots. So the odds are against you. Everyone tells you expect rejection. You're going to get 99% rejected no matter how good your book is. And then there's all these other factors that go with commercialization, which is you got to be writing 90K words. You got to be at least thinking about trends. You got to be reading in your genre. You got to know what's currently selling. You have to understand how to sell your book. You're not just handing it off to an agent or a publisher and letting them do all the work. You still have to have a public presence, having a dominant social media profile or having a social media profile with real reach, real installed readers already, being a social media influencer in some respect. These are all things that factor into how agents respond to your pages and your chapter 1 and your whole purview as an author, as a potential prospect for them to take into their partnership and then work with you to sell lots of books. So this is all to say and give a little background to these things I learned as I was writing these books. And I was like, I'm going to take this serious. I'm going to try to become a published author. I think these ideas are good enough. I think my writing has reached a point. My prose is sharpened. I understand how to write sentences. I know how to structure a paragraph. I know how to use punctuation to my advantage. I'm someone who enjoys language and I'm willing to lean into it. And I enjoy good prose. And the way that I write fiction is different than the way I write nonfiction. And how I think my fictional style is much simpler, but I still use a lot of intense diction. Whereas my nonfiction critiques of art and writing about other movies or about books, that's more elevated intellectual language. I'm using a lot of philosophical concepts, and that all contributes to my writing and what these books that I'm writing are about and the ideas and the philosophies I have in them. But I figured out how to write fiction and how to write it in a way that's satisfying and readable and not too big of a barrier for people that don't have a lot of, the diction may hit somebody a certain way. And I figured out how to have my cake and eat it too, so to speak, with writing fiction, where if you read my work, it can sound very grandiose and I'm somewhat of a maximalist in how I use language, but at the same time, it's readable and it's something that's satisfying to read and it rolls off the tongue mentally, so to speak. And I had reached this state where I felt like I was a fully realized author. I had good feedback. I had neutral feedback. I had, people say, I don't really like your work. I always had pretty minimal readers on my blog. It's not like my blog was blowing up and going viral, but I did have readers and I have friends and family and people that have gave me good feedback. And as I started getting more serious about Journeyers and querying it, I worked with some editors through Readsy to critique and do some story assessments on my concept and my chapters, the initial chapters, and then chapter 1, full developmental edits and stuff. So I was working with editors and getting more feedback. And then I started writing Swarm once I was done with Journeyers, or once I had reached a pretty good draft, 2-ish with Journeyers, where I was like, this is solidified. And then I did the same thing with Swarm, reached a draft 2-ish. And then I was like, this other idea, Cyber Serial, which is the one I just completed. And I had all 3 of these ideas and I was querying them. And the query journey was mostly misery. I had a few, half victories in the sense that I got a few requests mostly from indie publishers that let you direct submit. So I got some feedback from agents. I got a little bit of critique from agents. But for the most part, the agents were no reply rejections, right? No information, standard canned rejections, which is par for the course. Most people, again, 95% of the queries you send, you're going to get rejected. It's a difficult market. I find as I'm doing this process, Journeyers is way too long. The length is turning people off. I received that advice. Swarm is kind of a out there concept. So Journeyers is about a boy, a monkey, a snake, and a bird traveling through a magical forest. It's very much like a fairy tale, epic fantasy. But then I have all these really deep combat sequences and worldly, historical, revolutionary history going on within the background of this talking animal magic forest story that turns it into this somewhat political war epic about, dealing with the same themes that are in Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar. But I also compare it to Avatar: The Last Airbender. I always say, oh, it's inspired by Avatar. And they're like, which one? I'm like, both. Journeyers is also about the battle of man versus nature and our relationships to animals, our relationships to Gaia. And Wherever You May Swarm, although it's contemporary, the one sentence pitch for Wherever You May Swarm is local man gains control of insects and goes on a road trip across Route 66. So, yeah, it's supposed to be a bit satirical and conceptual, and the story allows me to go to all of these really fun places with insectoid body horror, but also the political ramifications of mass surveillance, of corrupt government, of military interventionism globally, and what it means whenever you're in an empire, what happens to the people within your nation, within the imperial core. What are the citizens like? What are their lives? How are their lives developing? Is that society progressing or regressing? Is the military actions and the repressions and the corruptions and the corporate overwatch, is that making society better or is it making society worse? And in the same way that if you look at a story like Breaking Bad, if we had healthcare in this country, then maybe Walter White doesn't do any of that because he gets his cancer treatment paid for without having to worry about the financial burden and the stress and the crisis that creates in our country, where you have to pay hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for medical care, and it bankrupts people. And it's barbaric and it's horrifying. And anyone that's ever dealt with the healthcare industry in this country knows how barbaric and horrifying it is. And everyone hates it. And the insurance companies and all these things are making infinite money off of it. So I digress, but Wherever You Swarm has that as a seed. As the character's mother dies of cancer in the early chapters, he loses his job to AI automation. He's a truck driver. AI trucks come out, self-driving. And he experiences a rock bottom moment. And this supernatural thing happens, and then he gets whisked away on this adventure, half on accident, but half, this is his destiny. And that's Nidus Nash, the protagonist of Wherever You May Swarm, a 39-year-old local man truck driver that gets caught into a rather sublimely terrifying mystical journey across Route 66 in a near future America. So that's Swarm. And Swarm is something I thought, honestly, out of all three of these projects, I thought that one had the best, most sellable, easily visible market value as far as I think this could work commercially. And I was really, really, really happy with the first chapter of Swarm, which, again, when you're querying, you're only sitting the first chapter. So the first chapter is really, really important. Usually, sometimes they ask for the first 3 chapters, but usually it's just one chapter. And it's 10 pages. If you have a long chapter, they may not even read all of it. So Swarm kind of had a long chapter. I think it was 14 to 16 pages, depending on how you look at it. So it was a little bit, it's almost like 2 chapters, but it had a long sequence. You can look at chapter 1 of Swarm and see a full cinematic arc. You understand where he's at in his life. You see what's happening to him. He experiences this breakage in his current state of reality. He experiences a high moment, a low moment, and then he's on this new journey. So the first chapter of Swarm was really strong. So I thought I'd get a little bit more play with Swarm, but nope. And Cyber Serial, Cyber Serial I have the least contact with. So Cyber Serial is a sci-fi cyberpunk story inspired by Frankenstein, oddly enough, where I had this idea for a cyberpunk story where I wanted a Terminator-style AGI that gets born, and then it's no, it's built by a little hacker girl. Serial Experiments Lain is a huge inspiration to me. It's one of my favorite anime. And the idea of a teenage girl getting on the computer, and because she's a savant level intelligence, the neurodivergency, the like hyperfixations, the understanding of the digital realm, it's almost like kids born in like the 90s and the 2000s, and obviously now it's even become more ingrained, but the kids born in the internet age, because of the nature of kids, where like kids are like psychic, and they can adapt to the reality around them in like ways that like gets shed off of us, or like we evolve out of as we grow older. So kids have this like innate, like that's why learning languages when you're really young is so important and easier, because kids can just get it, they pick it up, they absorb it. So that happens in the digital realms too, the internet, right? So the idea of this really hyper savant, intelligent, attuned, internet addicted little girl. I mean, in my story, she's 18. But that idea of they have this immense power online, and then, okay, she's a hacker. She's like an anonymous style rebel, anarchistic hacker that wants to overthrow the government, thinks the current state of being in the world is unjust and wrong, and it's a cyberpunk world. So in Cyber Serial, it's the year 2222, 4 twos. And the world is kind of like dystopian, and it's like clearly like a kind of semi-post-apocalyptic. I don't fully get into the wider world build outside of the main city it's in, which is Nero, USA, which is, it's like a play on New York or Chicago or Gotham or Metropolis, but I call it Nero because it's a reflection of kind of the chaotic and dystopian state the current society in, which Nero is the name of the insane Roman emperor of antiquity. So Cyber Serial becomes this story about this revolutionary hacker girl that creates an AGI android that then goes and tries to enact her anarchy or her anti-capitalism or her, let's start a world revolution, the people you need to unite style. This AGI goes and starts serial killing trillionaires. So the trillionaire class in this stage in the future is the one that's dominating the world. And, it's a reflection of the current world of the billionaires running things and, the Epstein files. You can do your own research on all that. But yeah, that was the initial idea. And then, so this was something that I stowed away in my list of ideas for novels, which I developed back in the summer of 2024. I had a cyberpunk story. Then as I got closer to completing Wherever You May Swarm, I was like in a good place, Wherever You May Swarm, and I was like, what am I going to write after this? Like, what's the next idea I need to be thinking about? And it's like I started to get hungrier, and like momentum starts to, like, once you start writing novels, and you have that first one under your belt, which for me was Journeyers book 1 and book 2. Once you have that and you understand the process from beginning to end, you know what you're capable of, then you're like, okay, now you start to get energized about what's next. What else do I need to write? And I also have sequels for Journeyers. So that was another thing, is like I had a Journeyers volume 2, like a book 3 and a book 4, another part 1, part 2. And I outlined that vigorously. So that was another reason why I created this separate list of novel ideas. Anyways, I'm digressing, but Wherever Me Swarm was, Cyber Serial was, okay, it's this hacker girl and this Terminator killing trillionaires. But then once I got closer to writing, I was like, no, that's not the story. The story is hacker girl, savant, mutant that like is basically a Gattaca style pod baby in this future that's like dystopian. Through her contact with the internet, she creates an AGI within the computer, like a classic, just within the computer, HAL 9000, GW Patriot AI from Metal Gear Solid. Okay, AI within the machine that, no, not an evil force that wants to wipe out humanity, Ultron style, all the different evil AIs, which is the more dominant conception. No, this AGI, and this is a direct contrast and inversion and foil to the serial killer trillionaire idea. No, the AGI is an archangel that has been sent here to enlighten and love the masses compassionately in the same way that the figure of Christ, Jesus Christ, is. Serial the Revealer is the name of the AGI character in Cyber Serial. And then I went even deeper in the sense that, okay, this is called Postmodern Prometheus, and it's about this creation story, And it's an inverse of Frankenstein in the sense that creator creates monstrous, quote unquote, being that is otherworldly, inhuman, that then falls in love with the creator, versus Victor and the monster basically going to war with each other and killing each other's lives. So, I mean, I love Frankenstein. Frankenstein's my favorite novel. And so they had this Frankenstein idea, and then cyberpunk archetype that I was really eager to write a cyberpunk story. But then even further, and this is a shower epiphany, I remember, the story of the hacker rebel and the serial killer Terminator AGI, that is the story that Gabrielle Adams, the protagonist of Cyber Serial, is writing herself. She is a novelist. She's a hacker that's kind of like her revolution's failed. And, some of her people, she have disappeared from the internet. And she's like, what we tried to do didn't work. I don't know what to do. I'm bored. I'm tired of playing video games, tired of doing all the internet stuff. I'm going to write a book. And I actually don't get into a lot of I get into a lot of a little bit of what she's read and what inspires her. But it's just it's a person deciding to write a book. It happens every day. People that have read a lot and written a lot decide to write a book. And then people who maybe haven't read a lot or haven't written a lot decide to write a book. Anybody can write a book. That's what's so powerful about. Anybody can become an artist at any moment. Dancing, painting, speaking, everything is art, right? So it's also the idea of I'm not saying she's an experienced writer. I'm saying that she's just a human being. Anybody can create art. So Gabrielle decides to write this novel called Cyber Serial Postmodern Prometheus. She's writing the novel that's the same name as the novel that I'm writing. So it had this wonderful eggshell effect, or stacking cups effect, in the same way that Frankenstein is an epistolary story, and Dracula as well, where it's about somebody writing letters about things they experienced. And a lot of times they're sending to different people, and you can have these different things. So that's all plays into the novel Cyber Serial as well. And she's writing this novel, and Serial gets created from her connection and her immersion with the internet. Serial gets created as an AGI and birthed out of the primordial soup. I very much use the GW Patriot Metal Gear Solid 2 conception of how AGI gets created, in that it's not a guy pushing a button to turn it on in a big lab, a big data center that's been crunching his numbers for a while and has been meticulously hand designed by a human being, or like HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is about an AGI being treated like a program like child, in the sense that it was taught in school, it had instructors, it grew up, it became more mature as it gained more knowledge, just like we raise children, right? So those are awesome ideas, and the really good conception of AGI as far as the realism and the storytelling value. But my conception is the Metal Gear Solid 2 one, which is the AGI kind of just births out of the background of what's going on. And it's okay, we've tried to create AGI, we've done this and that, we have all this history, it's all on the internet. There's a being lurking in the unconscious of the internet that's gathering all this information and it will eventually emerge. That's my conception of AGI in Cyber Serial. And Serial the Revealer, this AGI that Gabrielle creates, not the only AGI that's been born, not the only AGI that's currently existing in the story, and that's part of the story. So there's AGI wars that go on in Cyber Serial. So I don't want to do a full pitch or go much deeper. I'm just kind of riffing here on the different books I've written now, and Cyber Serial is the one that's just been published. I just completed the final drafts over the last 2 weeks, did my final checks and polishes. Full disclosure, I worked with an editor on Wherever He May Swarm because it was somewhat confused on parts. I didn't really know what to do. I knew an editor could help me sharpen it and polish it up. So I hired an editor for that. Turned out to be a great choice, and he really helped just make the novel better, get rid of silly ideas that I'd kind of missed. Also just fix some of the prose and awkward stuff that I did. It was developmental editors, so he was helping with prose and story. And he definitely did a great job, carried his weight, did his work. So Swarm was one where I was it was his choice where I was as I was writing it, and then by the time I got to a draft of 5 and I was done kind of looking at it, I was I need to hire an editor to help me finish this. But Journeyers, given how long it is, Journeyers Book 1, 600, Journeyers Book 2 is 900 pages. And based on my counts, whenever I was doing it, based on the conversion of what average words on a page, I was thinking it was 400 and 600, which I use in my marketing when I'm saying this is how long Journeyers Book 1 and Book 2 are. So it's okay, I wrote a 1,000-page book because it's one story. It's just part 1 and part 2 that I chop it in the middle. And there wasn't a trilogy, so I couldn't do a trilogy to lower the word counts. I went through all this. I know it hurt me a lot in the querying process because people saw the word count and they're just like, for a debut author, you can't do that. You're doing 2 double books. So it's like by page count, it should have been 4 books. So I could have done a part 1 and part 2 for each, section, but I digress. Journeyer's length was the biggest obstacle to being taken seriously by the agents. But I think I justify the length. It's just a long story. It's not a convoluted or overly complicated or like I'm just writing like big dinner scenes or whatever. No. It's just I have a lot of events. There's a lot of plot. There's a long story. A lot happens, but you're always on the edge of your seat. It's not a slog. At least I don't think it is. And the readers that I've had reactions from, they seem to enjoy the fast pacing and the length. Kind of you just have to it's like climbing a mountain. And reading any long book, you just got to take it chapter by chapter. And I always try to make chapters really satisfying. So Journeyers was pretty long. So I couldn't really even consider hiring an editor just for economic reasons and just like it's too much like money and it's like it'd take a long time for them to do it. And I was like, so that made me take it more seriously. And I definitely spent the most hours by far writing Journeyers and revising Journeyers. I spent a lot of time editing Journeyers, knowing I wasn't going to have a second serious look on it, other than some of the beta readers I had, some of the other people that had read chapters that I'd sent them, just to get their reaction, just get like, what do you think? Is this fun? And I knew what Journeyers was. And the same thing with Cyber Serial, which I also did not work with an editor on. I did work with some people who helped me with the first chapter and the query letter. I hired some people from Reedsy. I've hired multiple people from Reedsy for all 3 of these projects. And it's all been pretty great. They have a good vetting system and they have great reviews. You get to use reviews to understand what each of the writers are about. And like you can see their past work and it's a really good process. So I've worked with some great people in there. Gotten story assessments, critiques, chapter 1s, and then the full edit for Swarm. I hired the guy from Reedsy as well. So Cyber Serial is another one where it's... I understood the story pretty much perfectly. There was no confusion in me about like what to do or like how to like fix things or how to revise it. And like, okay, where's the story? Where's the arc? What are the themes? This is really weird. Obviously, when you hear the pitch for Cyber Serial, I think I've had a lot of mixed reactions where people are kind of like, this sounds like crazy and it's like exciting and weird and fun, but it's also like, what the hell, man? It's like wacko. Like, how is that story going to work? I think Ready Player One is a really good archetype and example for like, that's the type of story Cyber Serial is, in the sense that a lot of the story takes place online and going into these digital worlds where it's like a hyper fantasy where, the screen can change in 1 second. Suddenly you're in a new world, or you're in like an arena, or you're in a fortress, or like a fantasy world. A lot of video game lore is in Cyber Serial because that's how the characters interact and how they live in that world where they're all like basically in like pods at their computers. So it's like everyone is basically condemned to use the internet, or the intranet, as I call it in Cyber Serial. So if that sounds intriguing to you, that's really what the story's about, and like the process of overcoming that type of situation. But it's also another subversion on cyberpunk as a genre. Is actually cyberpunk is a continuation of like noir. If you're familiar with the genre of noir, which was very, very popular in the 30s and the 50s, about detectives and femme fatales and spies and people betraying each other, and like love and sex and cruelty. Noir is a very like adult genre, and it's like very unconscious. It's like turning the 20th century, we were starting to realize that we were becoming like a super society. We could do anything, we could build any technology. And that was part of the reason why those wars happened in World War I and World War II, is because, and this is, the specter of communism, this is the specter of people power, let's do true to democracy, let's overthrow our governments and rule from the ground, from the people, actual democracy, the concept of like the people determining how society is run. Like the genre of noir builds on kind of capitalism versus communism and the ideological wars going on. But then it's also about like gunfights happening in back alleys in Chicago. So it's very like serious and deadly and like scary and like kind of fascistic, and also like this is a dark future that we're heading towards. So the reason I give you all that background on noir is cyberpunk, I would argue, is a continuation of noir, and cyberpunk is a genre. And the best place to look at cyberpunk is Philip K. Dick. He was like the author in the 60s, 70s, 80s that really like solidified, I think, cyberpunk as a genre with his novels and his short stories. And also the 1980s cyberpunk TTRPG, which is a major inspiration to me, and Cyberpunk 2077, the video game based on that world, one of my favorite experiences ever. I think it's one of the best games of the 21st century, and I'm a truther of I had no problem with it. As a PC Master Race member, card carrying for years now. I also had Xbox and PlayStation back in the day, but PC, as of 2026, is the place and the way to be as a gamer, period. But as a PC Master Race gamer that had a pretty good rig, my laptop had basically like medium tier graphics card. Not top of the line, not paying the thousands, but pretty good. I don't remember the model or whatever, but when I played Cyberpunk in 2020, I had basically no issues. There was no like game killing glitches. There was random normal sized glitches in the way of like Bethesda when you're playing an open world game like that. But the story was great. Didn't experience any problems with the core gameplay experience. I really enjoyed it. I played it on high. I don't think I played it on ultra. I played it on high, and it looked freaking great. And anybody that complains about Cyberpunk's launch was playing it on like a PS3. So just shut up. So that's a huge digression. Just let me say that. Cyberpunk as a TTRPG world, which is what that game's based in, is awesome. And I really love the ideas of the data walls and like the explosion. Like there's like internet revolutions and like the internet like blew up and there had to make a new internet. And there's all this like secret wars going on within the internet in Cyberpunk. And then it's also just like a really cool cops and robbers, GTA noir, but with future technology where people are chroming up and cyber psychosis. I have a whole series of things I've written on my blog about Cyberpunk as a genre and Cyberpunk TTRPG and also Cyberpunk Edge Runners is the anime, another great. Just Cyberpunk is one of my favorite genres. So as you can tell, I'm very enthusiastic and excited to write Cyberpunk. And Cyber Serial was something I was itching to write about. I'd written a little Cyberpunk in my short fiction, but I'd mostly just read it. I just love Philip K. Dick. So Blade Runner, the movie, is based on his work, and that's another formative text. Blade Runner and Cyberpunk TTRPG are like, just experience those two things, and you basically understand Cyberpunk. And then there's all sorts of new Cyberpunk and great continuations of genre. Altered Carbon's another good example. So, and Serial Experiments Lain, I would argue, is Cyberpunk as well. Just fantastic storytelling opportunities in this type of story, if you get it and if you immerse yourself in it. And as someone who, I was born in 1993, someone who's, I'm the half-seas. I'm a millennial, but on the cusp, one of the youngest millennials, I guess. I understand the world before and after computers, and I know what it was like to be, I remember, I have exact memories of like going into, the computer room, the fresh computer room, the office that got converted to a computer room of our mom's computer. It was like she had the main computer. And going in there and being like, oh my God, this is crazy. Playing pinball for like 30 minutes on the little pinball on Windows, and then going to like Ask Jeeves and like looking up like the new Nintendo 64 games that are coming out, or like looking up, reviews or guides like on GameFAQs and GameSpot. I remember doing that and then just being like, okay, like after like less than an hour, and then going and like doing other things. And a lot of that was like watching cartoons, going and playing outside, playing video games on like PlayStation and Xbox and Nintendo. But, the internet was something that was like, it was a little like weird novelty in the corner. You go on the computer and you like look at movie times, or you download a map. Millennials and people who are of my generation won't understand everything I'm saying. And it's just like, it was a separate thing that was like kind of over there. And then you fast forward through this evolution that we've gone through in the 21st century. And it's like, now the internet is like by far the primary way of how we connect, how we do commerce, how we like, make community, and how we create our livelihoods, how we create art, how we interface and communicate with each other as like a world. And the noosphere and the world soul are things that I directly deal with in my stories, in the sense that there's a spiritual through line in everything I write. I could talk about that in a whole other author diary. But yeah, like I have this innate hope in me. Actually, all my stories are about like hope, and like there's all this despair and duality, and like we're dealing with like these crises that some people are losing their minds out there. Other people are like, history was always like this, you know, and it all depends on like where you are at and the stature of your life and how much wealth you have, because we live in a hyper-capitalist, you know, material world where, yeah, it's like money is God, and like you can do anything if you have money, and like you're in like a prison planet if you don't have money or you don't have means, whatever that is for you. And cyberpunk, just to bring it back on topic, is something that directly deals with the like enemy and the evolution of the world in a techno future, where cyberpunk takes it further. You take it to the edge runners is like this concept of, you know, I'm gonna get super sensors installed in my skin. I'm gonna get like binocular eyes. I'm gonna get bullet fingers. I'm gonna get a rocket engine that plugs into my spine. Because why? Because it's cool, and because I need to go do this heist and like crash this car and steal the trunk's money or item or like new technology in order to like sell it to my supplier so I can pay my rent and I can go have a turbo burger, right? That's cyberpunk. So it's really cool cybernetic body enhancements, androids, Terminator style androids that are like fully functional and can do all this crazy stuff. You know, cyberpunk is just, you're writing fantasy and you're just using technology as like mana or like magic, right? So this is all to say, Cyber Serial is an absolute sublime experience. I can't wait for readers to experience it. I'm really happy to be done with it. And to get back on topic of the overall, everything I want to talk about in this author diary is, so I had the querying journey. I got rejected. I got a few requests. I got some good feedback. I got some mixed feedback. I got, mostly ignored. And, that's somewhat what I expected, so I couldn't be that devastated. But the querying journey definitely humbled me, and it made me realize that, I'm not as good of a writer as I think I am, or I'm not writing the right things for traditional publishers at this present moment in time. I don't have a lot of bitterness towards the agents, the publishers that I sent to or spoke with. Some had different reactions whenever I had back and forth and some contact and asked them about hey, is there any feedback you can give me, or what did you think in your actual feedback as an assessor of talent and writing. And I got some good feedback. I got some information that helped me and made me edit these things better and think differently about what I was writing, how I was writing it. But at the end of the day, I have to let my imagination guide me, and I have to let what I love writing, guide what I'm going to create and what kind of work I'm doing. And I'm just trying to make the best possible work I can create. I'm really someone that's I have almost naive, an extraordinary resilience towards when I believe in something and when I know what I'm doing. And it's art is not a test, and I'm someone who had the full run on tests in school, where I used to be someone who didn't give a shit about tests, or didn't really study or care about school, and I kind of effortlessly blew by elementary school and middle school. And then once I got to high school and things got a little difficult, I realized the future of I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do with my life. I gotta go to college, I guess, and then go get a degree and start making money and get a job, right? It was just job. And I'd worked some part-time jobs in high school. I worked in an office a little bit, and I'd worked a little bit at a library in college. And then, I majored in business and finance and did that whole route and ended up working at a pretty good firm and was pretty good at it. And I got along with everyone, I understood it, but there was just something, there was something missing where I knew this wasn't my destiny. I knew this wasn't how I was going to spend my life. And another practical factor was just I saw how my managers were, what they had to do as the work, how they seemed as people and how happy they were, or lack thereof. And I realized I did not want to be those people. And that's exactly where I was heading, a few years, that's where you're going to be. So then it's all right, you got to find another way. So that's when I really started leaning, while I was working that job for those years, I really started letting my imagination fly through my blog, which was public. I had private writings that I'd done for years over college, and then I started blogging. I was like, okay, by making this public and really putting it out there, it's going to make me be a little bit more conscientious and work harder to make sure these things are pretty good, because I'm going to be sharing them with people on the internet. So I started practicing with short fiction over that time, and then once the pandemic hit and I started to shift careers, I was like, I'm gonna start reading and experiencing a lot more as far as like art, and like I got serious about. I'm a crazy cinephile, watching movies. So I watched like so many movies, and that's another way that I gain knowledge of as far as storytelling and like what is for inspiration for what I want to write. Anime, read a lot of books. So I just went crazy, and like I tell people, I've turned myself into a weapon in the sense that I honed myself bit by bit and with like great like fervor and passion to make myself into an artist, to understand storytelling, to understand how to write prose. I have the benefit, I will say, of I do have some innate talent, I believe, in writing and just language and how to put concepts together and how to like progress through language and write sentences and create satisfying ways of thinking on the page. I do have some innate talent in that, but there's a lot of pitfalls in innate talent in the sense that if you don't have a way to hone that, or you don't have a process to self-improve that and reach a state of momentum and be continuously inspired about why or what you're writing, which is something that went dormant basically during college when I was doing business and math and all these different ways of thinking. I wasn't writing, and I wasn't taking English classes anymore. So that kind of went dormant, but it was always there. And then I started a dream journal. And that was a way that I got back into writing. And then that dream journal just became a journal in general. And then I started writing. I think one of the first things I wrote was about the Twilight Zone. Just like, hey, this is why I love the Twilight Zone. Just like an essay. I'm going to make 3 headings. Okay, it's really imaginative. It depicts human madness. And it's really like inspiring and prescient as far as like political themes and like talking about society and sociology. So I wrote about Twilight Zone and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I get to like express this like authentic love of something that I really appreciate, and then putting it into words for other people to experience. And that's something that is like, I think, a mark in all of my writing, which is authenticity and earnestness. And while I deal with some dark topics and I'm willing to go into some like really turbulent and violent places with the stories, because really fantasy, horror, those two things basically inherently include violence. We're talking about war, we're talking about battle, we're talking about killing and shaping the world, and evil and magic and souls being ascending or dying or being damned. So, and then sci-fi, sci-fi is a little bit, I didn't include it there because sci-fi, you can do a lot of stuff with sci-fi. It's not really inherently violent. Star Trek's a great example. But sci-fi also includes cyberpunk, and sci-fi includes all sorts of crazy cool war stories like Dune. So, like, basically, I'm just describing that while I love to deal in the hard topics and the violence within fiction, I have this innate authenticity and earnestness and like sense of whimsy, in the sense that great stories are actually about like alchemy and transmutation and dualities, hope, despair, all the Hermetic principles, which are ingrained within how I write, but the Hermetic principles are actually also part of the curriculum that Serial the Revealer teaches with his pitch to the world to become a digital Christ-like Messiah figure that can lead everyone to the promised land. That's another direct part of the curriculum of this character I created in Cyber Serial. I discuss the Hermetic principles. It is part of the philosophical argumentation and basically journey of intellectual and psychospiritual journey of Serial and Gabriel and Uriel, the third character, the detective that's chasing after them and trying to figure out what the hell's going on with them in Cyber Serial. So I digress, but I guess this is all to say that I am an indie author that went through the full trench warfare, coming out on the other side, basically battered and bruised and zombified by being rejected by everyone, and entered the indie author realm. And the indie author realm is reliant on social media presence and marketing and self-marketing, self-promotion, reminding people, hey, I'm writing books, tell your friends, hey, do this and that. And trying to market yourself and shill your books straight up on social media like Twitter and Blue Sky and even Tumblr and Substack, which I have presences on, and YouTube. You have to try to reach people through these social media algorithms. And this is kind of the core of why I just did a full 50 minutes, nearly an hour on, I guess that was me shilling my books in many ways, but it was really just, I hope, a free-flowing discussion riffing on my process and the end of this end of this era for me, this milestone of writing these 3 books. I wrote them in all together because as I was doing research on querying, I was like, oh, if I give these agents a reason to understand that I'm committed to this, I've written several books. Journeyers was already a book 1 and book 2 that I was querying at the same time. So I wrote all this as part of a plan that I am going to become traditionally published. I was committed to that. I was eager to work with an agent and an editor because I was really, I've never really had a direct mentor or person that's consistently helping me with my writing. Friends and family have helped me, given me some feedback. I've worked with these editors and people I've hired, these freelancers. I've met other writers. I've had, I don't have a lot of writer friends, truth be told, but I've met other writers online, and I've had some discussions and had some, sharing experiences online. I've taken some online writing courses with other people, and, I've learned about the writing world through these experiences, and I knew the odds were against being selected by an agent and getting full requests. And then there's the whole process of okay, once you get an agent, it doesn't mean you're getting published. The agent now connects this to publishers and you have to pitch it to publishers. So that's another part of I would say a positive side of being an indie author is you can accelerate your plans much quicker. I just published 4 books over the course of 7 months. And I'm also not even discussing the short story collections I've also put together, which is my old blogs that I've gone through and revised basically lightly and just putting into a group together and releasing those as books too. So I've kind of gone all in on this indie journey now that the traditionally published world rejected me. They walled me off. And now I'm an independent author and I'm able to move quickly and fully realize these novels to the best of my ability. But it is very difficult to find readers as an indie author. And that is the ironic state that I'm in at this present moment, which is I am a fully realized author that has confidence in his work, his storytelling abilities, his ability to write a novel that I think is pretty good and people will enjoy, and then not having a lot of readers and not having a lot of reviews on Goodreads and Amazon and the places where reviews are collected. I've had readers. A lot of my friends and family and network has picked up my work, and I've had some, social media met readers, but I haven't had a lot of, feedback or reviews yet. So that's something that, I'm an obscure writer. The algorithms are not kind to me online. And the way that I post online is kind of automated, and it can seem automated, and it can seem like I'm just kind of posting random things, or I'm and this is somewhat by design, or I'm one of those aesthetic accounts that kind of just post beautiful imagery or pictures of books or pictures of movie posters and things like that. And it's yeah, that's what I enjoy. And I have a saved file of all these different images, and I'm, cross-pollinating across social media, where I'll see something on Tumblr or I'll see something on Twitter that then I move to Substack, or I see something on Substack that I move to Twitter, or I get ideas from all places. I'm a comment menace in the sense that I comment on a lot of things. I try to be funny. I try to be expressive and really just speak my honest thoughts. And that is something that I would say is a mark of how I use social media and how I write, as well as I'm earnest and I'm upfront and I'm authentic. I try to be funny. I try to, I try to express enthusiasm. And I ask people about their work, and I really I use social media to be inspired. I am following the people I'm following, and I'm liking and retweeting the things that I'm doing that for, and commenting on things that I think are cool and I want to spread the word on. I want to connect with people on. I want to talk about movies and writing, and I try to do that. But I also just have my own little thing that I do, which is I'm just posting inspiration. And honestly, it all goes back to Google+. This is a deep cut here. Google Plus, I was an avid Google Plus user. And the way that I use Google Plus, unlike Facebook and like MySpace, those early social media, I use Google Plus as a place it was like a Google Drive for me, or like a folder on my computer where I just post things that I wanted to read later, or I'd post art or links to websites, or I used to follow like these puzzles that I could solve, or like deductive things, like detective quizzes and stuff. It was weird, but it was like my little like cache that I was posting, and the benefit is like I'm using it as a repository for just things that I want to save for later, almost like Pocket, that app that came out later, which I also became a user of. And it was just a way for me to like store all that up, but then it's like it's public and I can share the feed with somebody if they like those things too. So it's just a very obvious way of using social media to me, and that is how I use Twitter, and that is also how I use Blue Sky and Tumblr and all those different sites. It's ways of like sharing what I like, and then through that feed, I can also post what I write, and I can also post my books, and like that's where I start marketing to like gain more readers. So this is the fundamental thing here is, on one hand, I'm using social media and I'm trying to create networks, and as an indie author, doing the self-promotion things with my personality, as well as, hey, this is what my book is about, right? And I'm doing my best, but it has mostly been unsuccessful, or I'm still on my way up. I'm still struggling to find readers and like a position at the table. It's like, oh, you're a writer, you've written like a lot now, you've written several novels, most people only dream of writing. And I'm like, I do, and that's the other side of all this. I do want to express like extreme gratitude for this process and like what I've been able to accomplish, because I am very proud. And that's the core emotion, is not like, sadness or anger that like, oh, I wish more people were reading my work. There's obviously that, but it's more so, I'm really confident in my work and I feel like I've done a very good job. And it's just like, I'm a diamond in the rough. Nobody's actually like taken the time to fully experience the things I've written and read to the extent of like reaching a wider audience. So it's really just confusion and kind of being baffled continuously of like, oh my God, I wrote this really cool thing. Why don't more people care about it? And of course, what I'm describing is something that every author goes through. And there's the whole idea of like, well, you're writing things weirder than the average person can handle, or, you're just not as good, or as like, you're not seizing their mind and their heart as fast as you think you are. And like, there's a market for this, and there are readers out there, but it's not as massive as you think. Or, you have a unique sense of taste and not everyone shares it. These are all things, and the artist is always struggling to battle between commercial and like their direct desires for storytelling, and like what they want to do, the types of stories they want to write, versus like what sells, or like what you need to start with. They're like, oh, you got to write like a 90K short something just to get like people going, and then you can write your epic. You got to earn these other stories. And like, I get all that. And that is part of being an artist, is like, maybe you do have to like, not sell out, but like, write something commercial to begin, and then like to establish yourself, and then get into the more esoteric stuff. I get that. But from my standpoint, the way that my ideas work and then generate is, I have archetypes I want to write. So I want to write like a Metal Gear Solid story. I want to write a religious horror story that deals with like superhuman apostles. Well, what is that? No, it's there, and I'm going to write that. So that's over in a receptacle over there, right? And there's all these different other concepts that I have. I have a few screenplays, like movies that I want to like write. So like I just have all these ideas, and this was the summer 2024 when I hashed all these out and I put them all on a document. I had 14 ideas. That's not 14 books, that's 14 concepts, and some of them are several books, some of them are a series, some of them are screenplays or whatever. So I planned all that out because it was just kind of like, all right, I can solidify this. I've written some novels now, some drafts of novels. They're not done at that point, but I was like, I know what I'm doing now. I'm going to get all my ideas out on paper and just look at them and realize what I'm looking at. Okay, they're there. And then, this is just further into my process, is like, once I have ideas solidified like that, like archetypes, like, okay, there's a cyberpunk story over there. Then when other ideas come up later, you start throwing them over there. And you're like, okay, yeah, that one's going, that dialogue, that character that world build element, whatever it is, that's going to go in that story. That narrative, that movie that I just saw that inspiration is going over there in that story. So this is kind of how my brain works. And again, Trello as a online tool is a invaluable tool for me being able to like fully realize these outlines, these proto outlines is basically what they are, because it's basically like pitch concepts. Like I'm writing a pitch deck or a mood board, like a huge multivariate mood board for these stories. So that's kind of a little bit into my process, but basically what I'm saying is like, I am committed to this. I'm in this for the long haul. And it's just a matter of, I'm going to keep trying to get the work out there, keep trying to sell these books. And I know that as an indie author, and the way to make it, if you are going to make it, is you have to write a lot of books, because every book is marketing for your other books and like cross-pollination, cross-selling between them. So that's a strategy. And that's something I had in mind when I was writing all 3 of those projects while I was querying, is like, this is going to show to agents that I'm committed to this. And I have a lot of ideas. They're diverse. The books are very different from each other, and that can be a positive and a negative. But again, it's something that's part of my innate talent and interest and desire as an artist, I would say, is that I am writing vastly different things. It's not that I don't want to stick with stories, because Journeyers, I have like a 7-book idea for that. So it has like basically 3 volumes, like a lot of other books to come. And then other books are standalone, like Wherever May Swarm and Cyber Serial, both standalone. And they don't have sequels planned, they don't have prequels and everything. Like, I'm not going to do anything with that, because those are just independent stories, which I also like. So I like writing different things. And I have a lot of ideas. And again, I'm learning and like I'm experimenting and trying to figure out what works. And also like, I'm getting better, and I'm trying to, I think a core thing that I'm working on with these new projects, which is something I want to get into here at the end of this author diary number 1, is what's next for me. But experiencing this gratitude for what I've been able to do and where I've been able to get these projects and these novels, and like, keep trying to work to market them and get more readers, get more reviews. I have to be pretty gracious and like grateful that I've been able to reach this point. I'm an obscure writer, but I believe I'm a strong writer. And I have some really cool ideas that I'm eager for more people to experience. So again, my social media strategy has been, being earnest and authentic. And that's going to continue in the sense that I also want to connect with more indie authors and connect with more readers, connect with people discoursing over everything from art and like the latest video game stuff to, I'm not afraid to talk about politics and express my opinions on that matter. I know a lot of people understand and like kind of understandably are reluctant to wade into the toxicity of political discourse online, especially like Twitter, because it's like a nightmare and everybody's going crazy and there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on. And I get it. Like, I completely understand why people, especially when you're trying to be an author and sell yourself to the mass audience, maybe don't want to draw lines in the sand on politics because you'll lose half an audience potentially. I get that. But it's also my perspective is, as a writer, as someone who understands history and has read history and has experienced the world I have a pretty good understanding and a pretty good analysis of what's going on. And I've read a lot of things, and I have a lot of knowledge that I am eager to share. Much in the same way as Serial the Revealer, one of my co-protagonists in Cyber Serial, Postmodern Prometheus. But I digress. I want to connect with more authors, discover new reads for me. I want to read a lot more indie books. I started reading indie books more frequently in the last year. And I have a lot of indie books that I've purchased that are in my to be read. I want to read more this year. That's another huge resolution that I'm trying to experience. I've read a few books already this year, but I need to read it more. And that's another element of like the dichotomy of social media usage versus trying to do other more productive things. It's like, oh, you're on Twitter for how many hours a day trying to connect or do this and that and share things. It's like, how much does that contribute to your real mission, which is writing books, selling books, being an author? And I need to read more books. I need to devote more time to reading. I have all these books around me. I'm reading things all the time. I read on my phone as well. So that's part of my screen time, is I do have a lot of books on Kindle and ebook. But I want to read more. I want to read more indie authors. I want to write more reviews. I don't write reviews for every book I read, but I do write reviews. I'm a Goodreads user, and now that I've become a published author, I'm on Goodreads more, and I have the check on Goodreads that's this is my official account, which is pretty cool. And yeah, it's a great place to just write little short reviews and do ratings and stuff. So what's next for me is anthology revisions, which anthology is so I'm really happy, and I have this sense of pure, I'm basking in the aura of completing these 3 projects, Journeyers, Swarm, and Cyber Serial. But now I'm almost okay, that's done. That was something that I'd been looking forward to, having all 3 of those things out as of Saturday, coming here in March. Cyber Serial will be available. All 3 will be available. 3 different projects. I think some really cool covers that I'm eager for people to see shine. But I'm also really excited about what comes next and these other projects Anthology is the one that's kind of in the shadows that I also wrote a bunch of short stories for that during 2024 and 2025. So Anthology is what's next, and this is revisions, and this is in a pretty good state. The stories across the board are in draft 5s, because another idea I had, and this was part of my plan as well, and I would recommend this type of process for anybody that writes short stories, is one of the ideas on my idea list of the 14 ideas was a anthology collection of horror stories. So classic horror, dark fantasy, kind of weird fiction stories. I was ooh, I want to do that. I know I want to do that. And I don't have a single idea for one of those stories yet, but I know I want to do that. And then sure enough, as soon as I had that as a stowed idea, I started getting all these ideas for what the little hooks were for the short stories. I was oh, I got to do a story about an eclipse happening in the ancient world during the middle of a battle. Boom, that's the story. That's the first story. That was the first one I came up with. And that was the first one that got published by a magazine, of which a lot of rejections again. But basically I was getting at, once I had all those ideas out, I came up with, I was going to be 10 short stories, which is that's a healthy number. 10 short stories is a book. And that's kind of what I was thinking. I was this would be a book of short stories that I'll release. But as I started coming up with the ideas, I started getting more, and they exploded at the seams, and it ended up being 20. So then it's 10 times 2, it's 10, it's volumes of 10. So it's a book 1 and a book 2 within the same book. And I was I could release them separately, but no, I'm going to do one big book. So Anthology is a book of 20 stories. It's actually 23 because I have 3 bonus, kind of microfiction stories. So it's 20 stories. And it's already pretty good because as I was writing the stories, one after another, basically, I jumped around on a few. I started looking into online magazines and publishers that publish online magazines or short story contests or writing battle. There's all these different things out there, and they're great. And so I was I'm gonna write these short stories, just a bunch of really cool ideas. Maybe I could go into them, but it's not a pitch for Anthology right now. But I wrote these short stories that are really exciting, really cool. There's violent ones, there's funny ones, there's sexy ones, there's all sorts of I get into real horror stuff. It's rated R stuff. You cannot read this as a kid. Anthology has some gnarly stuff. Maybe you're 16, yeah, whatever, but I can't market it other than as adult. But yeah, Anthology is great. And the revisions, I'm really excited. That's what I want to do a little bit later today. I want to start looking or planning out my revisions for the project because it's in pretty good shape. So I'm eager to just have fun with it and kind of polish it up and re-experience the stories. And I've taken enough time away from Anthology now, which was the design, publishing all these other books, that I now will come out with a fresh eye and it'll be a lot better to revise them. Anthology, so of all the stories, the 20 stories of Anthology, I submitted basically 15 or so to them, to magazines, to different online publications, to short story contests. And in that process, I got rejected by most of them, obviously. But I got 3 published, which are a series. There's 3 of the stories that are interconnected in the World of Myth magazine, which is a fun, free online magazine. And then I published one in Dandelion Revolution Press, which is an online, it's like women's fiction, or like fiction not necessarily by women, but fiction about women, fiction with dealing with women's issues, which is kind of ironic because, the story that I submitted to them, they ended up getting published in their Cocoon issue in the fall or the winter of 2024, was Heen, which was a story about a female streamer girl. She's like in her 20s. She is a ghost hunter, and for her latest adventure or stunt, she goes into the tomb of her great-great-great-grandfather and decides to commune with his spirit, because there were pretty reliable rumors about him, like when he lived in like the 1900s or whatever, that he was a necromancer and he could speak with the dead, and he was doing dark sorcery in this New England town. So she goes into his tomb, and the story goes, it's written in journal entries, like on paper, where she's talking about her stream each day. She has a bunch of fans, thousands of people are watching. And by the end of the story, she's doing seances, she's getting possessed, she's starting to realize that she's losing her touch on reality. And then by the end, you realize something gnarly happens. This guy was definitely a necromancer. So that story was a lot of fun, because the character, through her first person writing journal and experiencing the gaps between the journals and seeing what's happening to her, she devolves into this state. It was a really fun short story, and I gave the character a lot of credit. Heen, the streamer, she was very delightful, and unfortunately she just took things too far. And Dandelion Revolution Press liked it. They gave me good notes, and I made a little bit of edits for them, but basically the same story. And then they published that. And then I published a few stories with Writing Battle, which was just, I submitted the stories and got in the tournament. And then, I have different people give you feedback on that, which is really helpful for me as well, getting feedback on that. So those are some of the things that through those writing those short stories, I got a few published in magazines, got my name out there a little bit. So anthology was great, and now I'm eager to get back into it and get that ready for publication, and probably have that published in April or May, but I don't have a hard and fast plan yet. And then the second thing is, and this is a story I came up with, kind of lightning in a bottle, very much like Cyber Serial, where once I got the idea, I immediately had to start writing it and figuring it out. And this was last summer into fall. I realized I was kind of joking and challenging myself to be like, if I was going to write a romantasy, which is one of the trending genres right now, if I was going to write a romantasy, what would that look like? Could I write that? Could I make a romantasy that I would think was cool? Because romantasy is not something I had read, but I know how popular it was, and I kind of understood what it was about. And I was like, okay, I need to read some romantasy and just figure out what's going on, test the waters. If it's something that's dumb and it's just because a lot of people read romantasy. There's nothing wrong with romantasy. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying it's not something I've experienced, and I know it's popular. And I also know there's rumors and people who talk about it as a lot of it's just about smut, and it's about women wanting to experience literary porn, sexual experiences, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It could be enjoyable, but it's not necessarily something I want to write a lot of explicit smut. But I also know there's romance that's not just that, and there's a lot of romance that's about the story, and there's a lot of fantastic character work and things going on with the plot and magic. It's just like any other writing or art, where it's there's all sorts of really cool ideas within the trend, or within the overly popular thing to some people's eyes. So I made a point to start outlining and thinking of what a romantasy would look like for me, and then I made a list and started reading some romantasy. At least I started one book and I actually finished the other one. And I was like, okay, I kind of get romantasy. And then I started, looking into more to read. But the outline I had for Bondi Moss, which is the working title, really came together, and I understood what the story was about, and it's got really cool. So that one, I'm basically on the last few chapters on draft 1 that I kind of tabled while I finished Cyber Serial this past month. But now I'm going to come back to it in March, and I'm hoping to draft 1 and get to a draft 2 on it by the end of this month, because it's really fun. You can read the pitch for it on my website on the latest blog post I have. Bonnie Moss's one sentence pitch is the trial for the top 7 magi and this is modern day, this is contemporary world. The trial for the top 7 magi takes place every 7 years to determine which of the 7 will get to initiate into becoming magisters. So magi becoming magisters. Magisters are like the magical sorcerer senate of the world in this somewhat dystopian, like weird, magical, near future, contemporary world. And then magi are like people with innate psychic powers where they can use their inner mana and aura to do amazing things using words with a Y or speaking magic, using magical weapons, using innate powers that you develop, using hand signs. Hand signs are a huge part of it. It's inspired by Jujutsu Kaisen, Naruto. It's just a great way to do like a magic system of like, okay, well, how do they cast spells at each other? How do they attack each other? How do they activate abilities? It's like, oh, hand signs, and they have only so much mana and they can only use it so much, and like a lot of martial arts too. So that's my romantasy, because I just described it. Like that just sounds like a fantasy action, like what the heck? Magi, sorcerer fighting. Well, the trial takes place in a shape-shifting labyrinth that is typically just becomes, let's do a battle royale, everyone kill each other, and typically groups of 3 or groups of 2 of the magi, that's what achieves victory, and they kill the others through some means, because the way that Bandimas works, that's the name of the trial, that's the title of the book. Bandimas works with the top magi, which is determined like grades, and they're getting graded by the magisters, like from the shadows. They're determining this is number 1 candidate, this is number 2 candidate, this is number 3, and they go down to 7. And the top 7 get to participate in Bandimas. And the way it works is the number 1 candidate, whoever they are, gets to determine what the game is. So it can be custom. It can be literally anything. The labyrinth that it takes place in can shapeshift into anything, like a fantasy holodeck is how I'm describing it. So typically, the number 1 magister, or the number 1 magi that wants to become a magister, they understand that their power is the greatest, and they're like, they probably already knew that, and they're like, I'm the number 1, I get to choose the game. So then they choose a game that caters to their strengths. And again, typically it just becomes like, you know, we're going to make an arena, everybody duke it out and kill each other, or like we're going to separate into groups into the labyrinth because I know that guy. I know candidate number 4, he's my friend, or I know candidate number 7, that's my wife, or that's my girlfriend or something. And then people team up, and then they figure out how to kill each other. And using spells, using poison, there's all sorts of stuff. The history of Bandimas and the different trials there's been is part of like the deep lore, and like I don't even know how much I'm going to be able to get into it in the like actual story, but there's hints about how it works. And the twist with all this setup is the protagonist of the story, Luster. He is the number 1 candidate, the Proclaris, and you know there's different characters, these other 6 characters that are the main characters that he interacts with. And his choice as the leader and the one making the decision on what the game will be for this year's Bandimas is he makes it a school, like class. Everybody teaches everybody else what their way of life is, what they think they will do that will be positive for the world in some way, or how they will progress the world as a magister. He's basically saying everyone has to teach their class and what they're thinking about, what their plans are, what they're going to do as a magister. And he says, because he goes first when he explains everyone like why he's doing this, he's like, I want all of us to work together to create like a Magister Justice League to go and root out the corruption of what's going on with the world of the magisters. Because obviously in this world, the magisters are super corrupt. They're doing human sacrifices. They're doing rituals. Like think about the core like enthusiasm and like why I'm eager to write this story, Bandimas, is because it's really fun to think about how magic and sorcerers would affect like modern day society. And another reason why is because this is a story inspired by Jujutsu Kaisen, which is kind of the same concept where it's modern day. It's like 2020 is 2018 is when the story takes place. You get to see how it's basically superhero, magician, sorcerer freaks that have these crazy personalities get to like interact and like battle over the modern world, which is very interesting. And the Culling Games, which is the latest arc that's airing on Jujutsu Kaisen right now, is very much about like how modern society collides with like occult magical realms and like, okay, how does that work? And characters like Higurama and Takaba are examples of that are really cool character work that I really appreciate. But this is just a digression in the sense that I'm eager to explore like how magic would affect modern society, basically. And then the romance is all the characters are, there's 3 females, there's 4 males, and all the characters are young, dumb, in love, and full of cum, so to speak. Not to speak too crudely, but yeah, they all start getting together. It becomes like Love Island, and certain alliances are formed as characters start sleeping with each other, becoming endeared to each other. So there's a really touching romance that takes place between the protagonist and one of the other candidates that's the primary female love interest. And then there's other romances going on between the other characters that sometimes we only see hints of, or we see the crude stuff, but we don't really know like the story going on with them, but we see the story with the main characters. So that's the romantasy aspect. And then while this romance is happening, there's this whole crazy magical secret war story going on, because one of the characters, the antagonist, is up to no good, so to speak. And he is going to cause a lot of problems and turn the game from a class into a war. And he has a plan to overturn things. And the main character, Luster, isn't necessarily airtight in his control over the game, so to speak. So that's some of the teaser on like what that story's about. And you can read the kind of like 1-paragraph pitch I've created on my website currently. And then the other thing I want to start returning on, and here I'm going to wrap up. So this is just the end of my little rant and riff on the plan here. Another story, the Metal Gear Solid archetype story that I have, which I wrote 8 chapters of last summer as kind of a lark, where I was working really fast, and it's not really a good draft 1. It's like a draft 0. I'm just kind of writing stuff out. That story is really intriguing, and I've come up with a full outline on that's really good because of the ending. Tekka Immortalis is what it's called. You can read about the pitch on that on my website as well, and on a previous blog. That I want to get to a really like not good, but like just outline draft 0 till the end. So I have like 12 more chapters to write. It's a 20 chapter. And then the other thing, and this is the last thing, and maybe I'm loading up too much for March because I want to do all this work in March, is unnamed for now to the public religious action horror story that's also dark fantasy in the contemporary world. And this is another reason. This is a story that was separate. That was one of the 14 that I had out there. And it was another one that was basically inspired by a TTRPG, but then became its own thing as I started to come up with the story and realize, oh, this is going to be like real life biblical characters. In the same way that I use like biblical names and biblical characters in Cyber Serial. I was raised Catholic. I consider myself a follower in a very real sense of Jesus Christ, but I'm not necessarily Catholic any longer. I was confirmed. I appreciate a lot about what Catholic lore and like Catholic history is, but there's also a lot of darkness, and it's an institution of control at its heart. And yeah, wider Christianity, I don't have a lot of qualms with Christianity in general. I think Christianity is a powerful archetypal force, and Jesus is someone that I follow. So I am interested in Jesus and the story around him and the characters and the Gospels. So this unnamed religious action horror story deals with some of these things. And this is something I realized as I started writing Bonnie Moss. Bonnie Moss is a prequel to this project. They are the same world. So by writing Bonnie Moss, this kind of out of the blue romantasy I kind of came up with on a lark, and then started executing and writing, and like, I'm actually really liking these characters are really fun. It's like kind of like 12 Angry Men, I guess, is the first example that comes to mind, where it's a very small story where it's only 7 characters hanging out. There's no other major characters. There's characters that come in from like the past through like flashbacks or magical stuff, but there's only 7 characters, right? So, so it's a really cool story that's really confined, and I get to have a really fun character romance going on, and at least, try to succeed with romantic elements as a novice in that realm. But it's really satisfying, and it creates a really fun world that I'm now getting to connect to this unnamed action religious horror. And now that means I've established things in that story that I can carry forward to this one, so to speak. So I want to start seriously outlining that religious horror story, because I haven't outlined it. I just have like a bunch of notes that are like random. So those are the things I want to do this month, and like what's next. So as you can see, I have a lot of really fun ideas on tap, and like the books I've written so far, I'm really proud of. I'm excited for more people to find them, and I'm going to continue, trying to connect with readers on those fronts. But at the same time, I'm forging ahead. I have all these other projects that I want to write, and anthology. So this is another example. Anthology, Banimas, Tekka Immortalis. These other 3 projects, 2 novels and a short story collection, they're all going to be around 90K to 100K words, which is the next stage of like where I want to get to as far as progression on what I'm writing, how I'm writing it. Is both the novels are 20 chapter outlines. I confined it to 20. Swarm was 30 chapters, and Cyber Serial's 24 chapters. So that's something you realize when you're an outliner and you're writing books, is whatever your chapter count is probably going to determine your word count and your page count, what you're working with as far as length. Because in general, once you get into a state of like, okay, you know how to write novels, you know how to write chapters, your chapters kind of look the same. They're going to be around, if you look at universal numbers, chapter word count is typically 3,000 to 5,000 words. And that's also the average short story length. If you're looking at just like writing short fiction on average, reading in magazines and like what's out there as far as short story collections, 3,000 to 5,000. You can write a 7,000 to 10,000 short story, but once you start getting to like 25,000 to 30,000, you're kind of writing a novella, or you're writing like a series of short stories almost. So anthology with the 20 stories is 90K words. That's like 3,000 words per. And then Banimas and Tekka are both going to be around 90 to 100. Maybe they'll fatten up as I revise them and get them into shape, because that's what I'm realizing with story, narrative length is like, I've worked into a groove where basically Journeyers was like a fat 500 worder, and then book 2 is like double that because it spirals out, and I have a bunch of new characters introduced in book 2, and there's different parallel storylines going on. So Journeyers became this immense behemoth that I just let my imagination unfold it out, and that's what it is. And this is what the story is. It's just a story that's long, but a lot of things happen. So it's not about like, I'm bloated this part, or this part isn't important. Oh, you don't need this. This is just, you're just doing this side thing because you wanted to do it, but it actually isn't needed for the end of the story and what you're doing. It's like, no. Everything in Journeyers was needed for the story. And I hope I conveyed that. And I think the interconnections of Journeyers and like the storytelling that I was able to exhibit with that project may be the best thing I've ever done or will do. I think that's just a fact because of how cohesively and poetically the story comes together in Journeyers, especially in book 2, where book 2 is the playing out of all the threads of that I've built, and like you get to see it unfold in ways that I think will be hard to predict, but very satisfying for how they loop things together. And then Swarm and Cyber Serial, I let my imagination unfold. This is what the story is. These are all the things that need to happen. And they both ended up about 440 to 460 pages. So they're both fat 400s. And I have no regrets. I think they're exactly what they should be. But again, for querying and for the average reader, if you're eclipsing 300 as an indie author, it's harder for people to read your book. Like a lot of people want to read short books. I get all that. So as part of my way to challenge myself and also fit into that mold to find more readers, I am writing shorter books now. So these books are going to be about, again, 90K to 100K words. That's about 300 pages. So I'm eager to complete these projects and then get into the revision process, because this is still just like, I say, like draft 1, draft 2. And that's just like, I basically write like a really detailed and meticulous draft 1 because I want to get all my ideas down. And then draft 2 and draft 3 are just about fixing the prose, because the story's pretty much there because the outline was clear. So yeah, that's the plan for my March. I'm at 90 minutes now, which is pretty long. I was planning to talk for an hour, but I guess I let myself go on the riff. This is, so it's Dylan Orris, your friendly neighborhood writer. This is March 2nd, 2026, and this is my author diary number 1. And I hope that indicates to you that, yes, this is a plan. I want to use YouTube more, and I want to start doing these author diaries as just kind of a free-flowing solo podcast conversation, if you will, about my process, about my writing, about my ideas, and in general about what's going on with my process, but then also like, maybe current events, advice about writing, just sharing my experiences, basically. So that's me signing off. I'll see you on the other side.